Hello, everyone. Welcome to our plenary session for the 13th Annual Harry Potter Academic Conference. I'm Lori Beckoff, the Communications Coordinator, and it is my pleasure to introduce our plenary speaker for today. Dr. Priscilla Hobbs is a cultural mythologist who regularly researches and presents on the relationship between popular culture and society, and has published books about Disney and Harry Potter, including Harry Potter and the Myth of Millennials, Identity, Reception, and Politics, out in 2022 from Lexington Books, as well as articles across a variety of fandoms. She is also Senior Associate Dean at Southern New Hampshire University, and we're very happy she came down to join us here today, where she will be presenting on Wands Up, What We Learn from Harry. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Priscilla Hobbs.
All right, thank you. So thank you for having me, and thank you to the programming committee for the invitation to attend. And I believe this is live streaming, so thank you to the people out in the wide world of the internet for joining us today. I would like to first begin with a few words. Nitwit, blubber, oddment, tweak. I've waited my whole adult life to do that. I would also like to briefly do a few other words about the land that we are here today on with Chestnut Hill College, which according to the AI overview of Google, there is no land acknowledgement information, which I call BS on, but one of the things that Google does tell me is that this is the original land of the Massachusetts people and their descendants, and the Massachusetts tribe of the Ponkapoag, and we appreciate their stewardship, their traditions, and their language. Okay, so now the real stuff. I'm going to begin with a story time. How I came to Harry Potter, which isn't actually all that unique, I've learned, but I came to Harry Potter through a relative of mine who I was wrapping her Christmas presents, and in these collection of presents was a box set of the first 3 books. And of course I'm like, well, this is weird because my niece is an incredibly dyslexic person who was struggling to read. She was in late elementary school, and I was tutoring her after school, and she was barely reading through the assignments that we were working on. So I called my sister, I'm like, why am I wrapping these books for my niece who I didn't think she could read novels? And my sister's response was that Harry Potter taught her how to read. In reality, Harry Potter taught her to love reading and to love stories, and so she wanted to honor that by giving her these books. And I said, well, that's really cool. I've since learned, obviously, that many other people have had a similar journey into reading by way of Harry Potter, but it's always been a very like, oh, you know, my very highly dyslexic niece gets into reading by way of Harry Potter, so of course I need to find out what Harry Potter is. So I used that opportunity to go pick up Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone for the American audiences, and oh wow, look at that, I got hooked. Now, this conversation that I'm having at Christmas is Christmas 1999, what happened in 2000, Goblet of Fire. So Goblet of Fire was actually my first Harry Potter book release party at a bookstore, and you know, I'm like, this is all new to me because this wasn't a thing we were doing at this time. So I'm going into the bookstore, I'm pre-ordering the book, and they're giving away little tattoos of lightning bolts and little fake glasses, and then these kids are showing up in black robes. It's like, okay, there's something that's happening here. And so I leaned into this, what since became the Harry Potter phenomenon, but have been tracking it pretty much ever since then, trying to really understand what on earth is so interesting about these stories other than the fact that they're really fun to read. Along this journey that I went on, I had to try to figure out how to understand the Potter phenomenon. So I needed a language to do it with. And I'm one of those kind of really weird people who just can't stick to a single discipline. I'm like, interdisciplinary is the only way to go for me, so it's sometimes very hard for me to find that one language that gives me that entry point. And so, as many of my stories seem to do, I was hanging out in a bookstore, and I was wandering the bookstore, and there was this book on the shelf, and I picked it up, I read the first page, and I said, that's the book I need to, start this journey with. That book was a book adaptation of Joseph Campbell's The Power of Myth. So The Power of Myth is a PBS series that he did back in the 80s. They put it into a nice handy little book. I picked it up and I said, this is cool. So then I started this understanding of Harry as a cultural mythology and using this language of comparative mythology to really start to understand the stories, but then as time went on, more broadly, their relationship to society. At the time, I didn't know that this was a thing, but there's now this phrase that media scholar Henry Jenkins has coined called ACA-fan. It's one of those portmanteaus that doesn't come off the tongue very easily, ACA-fan. But the idea of an ACA-fan is it's an academic who happens to also be a fan. Now, the ACA-fan is also probably a researcher in their fandom, and so they are in continual dialogue with both the scholarship and the fandoms. So we are a room of ACA fans. So leaning into this idea of Harry Potter as a cultural mythology, let's dig into what that means. So the entry points into Potter typically become the characters and the places. So the characters are written in a way, they're compelling, right? We find those characters, we just attach onto them, we resonate with them, we follow them, we ship them. I don't ship them, but I know people do ship them. And, they just become, part of this experience, but why? And so this is where I'm going to start with Joseph Campbell, because Joseph Campbell outlines this idea of a hero's journey. And this becomes a literary thread that he uses to help identify this common narrative structure. So the hero's journey, long story short, there's a hero, goes on a journey, comes back, the world is better for it, right? That's a gross oversimplification, but he does say across over 20 different discrete steps that this is what the hero's journey is. But he categorizes those heroes' steps into three primary categories. There's the separation, there's the trials, and there's the return. Now, the separation begins with a call to adventure, so something that says, hey, hero, you need to go on an adventure, and then a threshold crossing where the hero says, okay, I'm going on the adventure, and leaves home to start the adventure. In Harry, this is most easily understood as the letter for Hogwarts, and then jumping on the Hogwarts Express, which we know really only works to one book. So we use subsequent readings of the rest of the series. It's like, well, what really is this separation? But that's okay, it gets the point across. The trials stage of the book is where the story really happens. It's where all the good stuff is. It's where the hero is encountering different pieces of adventure, recognizing what the boon is that they have to ultimately go after, and culminates in the big battle, the big boss battle of their story, which that's the good stuff of the stories. The return is at the end of Campbell's model is that the hero now goes home, and they share their boons with their community. So they go on this adventure, they bring back this reward. So it's meant to either heal the community, restore the community, make the community better. Which is, what happens in each of these books, right? Harry goes to school, has a big adventure, goes home to the Dursleys for the summer. Rinse and repeat a few more books, and then he doesn't go back. So Campbell gives us a way of starting to understand Harry as a hero and understand the interest in these books. But Campbell is also incredibly limited. So the hero's journey is written as a linear narrative arc. It begins, it ends. It's not cyclical, so when you're in a saga cycle like Harry Potter, what do you do when you get to the end, right? Do you do the hero's journey over again? Does it just keep repeating, or is there something else at play that explains the transformative arc of the broader saga? And so for this, it's helpful to start looking into the other disciplines. So Campbell's model of his monomyth, that's the other problem with Campbell, is he says it's the one and only true myth, and it's not very inclusive. And his model mirrors the ritual process that's outlined by anthropologist Victor Turner, where in that process, it's separation, it's liminality, and it's communitas. But this is meant to be a process of initiation. So you go through the separation, you go through the transformation, you come back, you're now initiated. Great, we still have the same problem of we got to the end of it, what comes next? So that's where I bring in archetypal and depth psychology. Within the realm of depth psychology, there is this concept of individuation. Individuation, it's a process. It's achieved through the therapeutic exchange between a patient and their therapist. And the idea of individuation is eventually your conscious and your unconscious merge together and you become individuated. So you're now a whole and complete self. This is what we see happening within Harry Potter. We see this process playing out. Each year of Harry's journey becomes a new layer to his maturity and to his understanding, to his framework of the world, and we as readers are brought along for the ride. And so we, as we're reading the books, also experience that growth, that transformation. I feel those children, I get it.
We inherited a middle and grade school in our college for 3 years after their school burned down.
Oh. But it just brings the Hogwarts ambiance to life, right? It's just par for the course. So we go through this process with Harry. We're going through as readers, and this is the magic of the hero's journey. We're brought along on the journey with the characters. So for those of us who may not be in a life situation where we actually do have very literal transformative journeys, or we do have, ritualistic initiations, reading and media become one way of getting us to that same kind of experience, because it's an innate human need to have ritual, to have story, to be able to commune with each other around these symbols that just resonate with us. The whole function of community really boils down to the stories that we tell to bring us all together. And so, we've got this really cool story arc. We've got these really great characters, awesome, and it's really compelling to bring it, get sucked into the stories, but it's also very easy to get stuck, stop there. Cool, we're done. Harry's a hero, we're gonna move on. But that's not what she does she? The world that the author has created for us is one that is very intricately woven with symbolism coming from mythology and from folklore. And so with intentionality, we are given this symbolic language to resonate into the stories in a way that, just a standard story wouldn't do. You look at something like Harry Potter and you compare it to, was it Cormac, what's his name? Yeah, Cormoran Strike. There's no symbolism in those books. They are very much just a engaging story that kind of plays into that detective true crime trope, but there's no symbolism in there. They're kind of dry. So, there's something that's happening in that mythology and that folklore that's bringing us in. So one of the things that she does that is also incredibly helpful is she brings in alchemical symbolism. Now, in the Harry Potter academic community, this isn't an unusual concept, this idea of alchemy. So alchemy is a type of medieval chemistry, kind of a precursor to chemistry, and the idea overtly is you turn one ore into another, turn lead into gold. And the gold that you achieve is the Philosopher's Stone. It's meant to bring, wealth and immortality. But what alchemy really is a symbolic language of how to make that transformation happen. And so by bringing in alchemy, what she's doing is she's saying transformation is happening, and here is actually a tangible way of getting to it. And she seeds this all the way throughout. The first book is the Philosopher's Stone, and Harry has to get the stone back, which has a whole little tiny subtext in there about the life of Nicholas Flamel. There are other instances throughout the books where we see that alchemical symbolism surfacing again to go through this transformative process. And so we are embedded through these archetypal images, and we are brought through this transformation along with Harry. But we are also shown what happens when transformation is negative. So with Harry and alchemical symbolism, Philosopher's Stone, this is a good transformation. This is what we want to go for, and we're very clearly nudged in that direction by the story. But we also see what happens when someone does a negative transformation, like with Voldemort and his Horcruxes, that each time he's creating a new Horcrux, he's actually transforming himself, but he's transforming himself into a demon monster that at the end shows up in Harry's dream as this little crying demon baby that, we know what happens to that little demon baby. So, cool, right? We're feeling transformed by Harry, but there's another thing that's happening that's really cool about Harry Potter. So, just a thought question. Harry Potter is this is moving, I'm sorry. Harry Potter is the protagonist, but does that actually make him the hero? And that's the big assumption, right? He's the protagonist, he's the hero, this is how hero's journey works. But he's not. Sure, he's the one at the end of the books who makes that final Expelliarmus, and he's the one who finally defeats the bad guy. But there is no part of his journey along the way to that final Expelliarmus that he could have done on his own. And it's not that he had magical helpers helping him. He actually had people doing the hero's work alongside him. So what we see happening in Harry Potter is what I call a collective hero. So this is a group of characters, they're brought together, they do the whole hero thing, but instead of it being a journey, they're rallying around a problem statement, and they're rallying towards this common solution. Along the way, they have to figure out how to get there, and they have to figure out how to get along with each other, so you see a lot of the push and pull like that Ron and Hermione and Harry all experience with each other, because they're still trying to figure out how they fit together in these equations, knowing that the only thing that's really the big driver is that problem statement, which is presented overtly as it's defeating Voldemort, right? But what ultimately they're doing is they're bringing balance back into the wizarding world. So what Voldemort represents in this whole quest of good versus evil is he represents what happens when there is some kind of social imbalance. And the kids are showing us what happens when people rally together to restore the balance, which just happens to be an Expelliarmus and the defeat of the bad guy at the end of the book. So that gets us closer to where I was trying to get to today. The one other thing I do want to touch on is that the other thing that makes Harry Potter really cool is when Harry happened, right? So the late 90s, early aughts were a very fascinating time in all of popular culture in general. There was, we were still riding some waves of the optimism of the 90s. Star Wars had just released these new prequel trilogies. This is kind of exciting. Then Harry Potter's happening. This is cool. But then 9/11 happens, and all of that optimism really comes to a screeching halt very quickly. And so the Potter phenomenon surges at this time because we recognized as readers that we needed something. We needed something more than what we were getting because there was this cultural shift that we were just in the middle of, and we didn't know what to do with. And so Harry Potter helped provide us some of that, that reassurance, that community confidence that we're like, okay, we've got this. But then there were those like me who had no fans to talk to, and it was really lonely. And so, internet, right? So it's not for nothing that this Harry Potter success really coincides with the mass surge of the internet in the United States and across the world. So the folks who are, driven to needing to develop that community around talking about Harry Potter are the same folks who built those websites. They're the same folks who hosted those first podcasts. They were the same folks who were, helping to bring fans together and really move fandom in a trajectory towards being an actual academic community and not just a bunch of people who rally together to buy stuff. All of this is happening because of Harry Potter. Now, Henry Jenkins, I like Henry Jenkins, recognizes this as a convergence culture, where there's this exchange happening between the creators of a product and the people who are consuming that product, and they start to work in tandem to co-create the experience of the space. Now we know, early days of Harry Potter, Warner Brothers and Scholastic, and they were pretty nasty to people who were trying to do Harry Potter stuff and realized pretty quickly that that was a bad idea, especially when they started suing children and getting negative publicity for it. Yeah, that was a really bad idea. But what they ended up learning from that experience is that they had free focus groups through the fandom. And so then the fans are like, hey, this is what we want, this is what we want. It's not for nothing that the fans are saying, we want an immersive experience of Harry Potter, and somehow they make it happen at Universal Studios. And I don't know how many of you have had the opportunity to visit Universal Studios and visit Wizarding World, but it is a very immersive experience. When it first opened, and I went down there to tour it, I was convinced, and I haven't proved this yet, but I'm 99% confident that the people who built Wizarding World were ex-Imagineers from Disney who were disillusioned with Disney. So they build us this experience. Florida now has the two Harry Potter worlds, with a third one opening next year. So at Florida, you can get the experience of Hogsmeade and Hogwarts. You can get Diagon Alley and Gringotts, and the one that they're about to open is Ministry of Magic. And this is all coming from the fact that, as fans, we were like, can't you make the magic happen? Can't you make pictures actually move? Can't you make things float and fly through the sky? It's really kind of, disillusioning when you're expecting to see letters flying around you and you see the strings. So those immersive experiences, they're ultimately what has held Harry Potter together as the fandom has grown and evolved and morphed into the different directions that it's gone. But one of the things that still resonates within Harry Potter is that Harry Potter built a community where people felt seen. So that gets me to really the whole point of what I want to talk about today. So I hope that you will indulge me for 1 second as I read an excerpt from my book, now available in paperback on Amazon.com. I want to set a landscape of where things are going in terms of Potter, and the community, and ultimately what we learn from Potter around social consciousness and social activism. Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince opens with the recently sacked Minister of Magic, Cornelius Fudge, paying a visit to the Muggle Prime Minister to bring him up to speed with the events around Voldemort's return. The arrangement allows the Minister of Magic to visit the Muggle Prime Minister to liaise between the magical and Muggle world, especially if there is something happening that has the potential to impact Muggles. This is to help maintain the secrecy of the wizarding community. Now, while the Prime Minister remains unnamed, it is worth noting that Tony Blair and the Labour Party led the United Kingdom from 1997 to 2000, essentially the release cycle of the series. While the focus of this book is Harry Potter in America, it would be surprising if the author's tone toward politics did not partially echo the trajectory of Blair's leadership. Initially, this administration was met with the optimism that accompanies a party change in a democratic society, in this case from a conservative to the more liberal-leaning Labour Party. But as with American politics, that optimism was affected by the 9/11 attacks. As British forces aided the Americans in the Middle East, a campaign that conflated revenge for the 9/11 attacks and the unreconciled dislike of Saddam Hussein's dictatorship of Iraq, that optimism waned, as we see reflected in this opening chapter of Half-Blood Prince. The two ministers meeting becomes a commentary on the multiple faces of a political leader: the political, the Prime Minister, and the public, the Minister of Magic. Fudge recounts for the minister all of the events that occurred over the last year, prompting the Prime Minister to exclaim, "Now, see here, Fudge. You've got to do something. It's your responsibility as Minister of Magic." To which Fudge responds, "My dear Prime Minister." This is the most British dialogue of these entire books. "My dear Prime Minister, you can't honestly think I'm still Minister of Magic after all of this. I was sacked 3 days ago. The whole wizarding community has been screaming for my resignation for a fortnight. I've never known them to be so united my whole term of office." Now, although this commentary is targeted at British leadership, the sentiments resonate with American readers as well, who were navigating that social shift from a liberal-leaning Democratic Party that led the country through the optimism of the 1990s to the conservative-leaning Republican Party with the 2000 election. When the 9/11 attacks happened, President George W. Bush had not been in office for a full year, but the 9/11 attacks accomplished two things for the Bush administration. One is that it gave the Bush administration clearance to further a conservative agenda that tightened social restrictions while loosening government corporate regulation. The former helped foster a sense of assurance, or reassurance, that the government was protecting its people. The passing of the Patriot Act in October 2001 gave the government more power to fight terrorism by expanding existing law enforcement tools into the reaches of counterterrorism. And that's where we get things like the TSA and eventually you have to take off your shoes to go into the airport. The other thing that happens with 9/11 is that regardless of the public's perception of George W. Bush and his administration, he is now cemented as a wartime president. Throughout American history and mythology, the president fulfills the perception of the ultimate American individual and carries an image of national wholeness. So the success of a president depends on their ability to unite the people and the perception of how they handle crisis. Wartime presidents have the added responsibility of keeping the country and its people safe. However, for Bush, he inherited an America that was jaded with war. The glory and optimism that followed World War II gave way to pessimism and distrust in the shadow of the Vietnam War. In addition, the internet and the development of online communities defined a new, more immediate feedback loop between the American people and the country's leadership. As the war on terror trudged on, as more government funding was shifted to support the military and the private corporations that were supplying the war, the trust in government waned. This coincides with Harry's own growing into political awareness, which helped provide the knowledge tools that millennials turned into election ballots and social justice groups. It also helped prepare them for the realities of an uncertain future that could be captured in a single image with the collapse of the housing market in 2007 and the Great Recession that followed. Millennials have never recovered from that period financially, and Harry's lessons helped arm that generation for the fallacies and foibles of the coming administrations. Hopefully. So, what do we get from Harry? First and foremost, we get from Harry a sense of respect for inclusivity and the beauty of diversity. Early on, Harry learns to embrace the uniqueness of different people, whether they're muggle-born, half-giant, or house elf, recognizing that each creature adds color to a community. But at the same time, they're also holding meanies like the Malfoys accountable, and they can't just get away with it. So the message of diversity that comes from Harry allows that people can have perspectives we disagree with, sure, because that's the heart of tolerance, right, is people can have different beliefs. However, those beliefs cannot do harm or take away somebody else's rights to live their life and have their free will. So, which is kind of an interesting problem that's been, the Harry Potter community, as we all well know, has been struggling with when you have such a strong message of inclusivity and an environment that surrounds it that is very not inclusive. We also see in Harry the idea of avoiding othering for political or social gain, which is something that Harry struggled with throughout his experiences. We see how prejudices and bias can overshadow someone's ability to see the merit of others. And we see the effects of magical classism and the tension that it creates throughout the wizarding society. And we also see that response to it, that we know it's not okay. So we know we need to step up and fight against it. But it's when you have characters that are like Dolores Umbridge. We will hear more about Dolores in just a few minutes. But Dolores Umbridge never outwardly says, oh yeah, I'm a Death Eater, I support Voldemort, I'm gonna do all of Voldemort's things. But we also have Dolores Umbridge manipulating through her educational decrees and ultimately creating a culture of control that controls the like-minded but suppresses the opposition. And that manipulation, as we see very loud and clear with Dolores Umbridge, is something that the kids in particular recognize we can't be okay with. And so they chase her into the woods, and she gets chased away with centaurs because, Expelliarmus. Harry also teaches us to question authority, especially authority that comes from adults in power positions. So, the Minister of Magic throughout the books is a boob. Put it bluntly, we can't really figure out what it is he's there to do, but he can be very easily swayed and persuaded depending on who's tickling his ego or giving him the money. We see the teachers are a mixed bag of trustworthy and questionable and abusive. And we see, even Harry, the teachers that Harry tends to resonate with are more the ones who step back and let Harry make mistakes, grow, and learn from them, rather than the teachers who try to control his learning experience or are so hands-off and frou-frou that he doesn't trust them at all. We also see that parents they're not off the hook either. And so, whether it's the Dursleys, whether it's the Malfoys, whether it's the Weasleys, we see from these books that, parents are fallible and they're vulnerable, but when they're in a situation where they aren't providing nurture for children, there's no way to make up for that. Harry also reminds us to be continuously questioning and to be curious, especially challenging established assumptions. So never take any information for granted or at face value, especially when it's coming from the adults. So all that to say, we have a very interesting experience in our horizon over the next few weeks. We have a presidential election in the United States, which is probably the most divisive and fraught that we've seen in modern American history. Regardless of where, of anyone's political affiliation, I don't want to make any assumptions, this is going to be an election where a whole bunch of people are going to get really pissed off. And this is going to be an election where nothing is going to be quiet and smooth. What we get from Harry is we get a sense of what kind of activism we need to bring and be armed with, so when these kinds of situations happen, we can be better prepared for it. It's very easily, I almost wore my Republicans for Voldemort t-shirt, but I had to retire it a few elections ago. But it's very easy to draw connections between the bad guys in the books, right? So Grindelwald, Voldemort, Trump. It's very, but the problem with that is there's so much more that's at play. And it's not possible for any of us to target one person, because we have to target an entire system, which is where that importance of that collective, that community that Harry is helping to encourage comes into play. Looking at the time, I just do have one more thing, because we can't let her off the hook. I'm sorry. I wasn't actually going to talk about her, but I'm like, I can't not talk about her. Because, as I mentioned, with Harry Potter, people felt seen. People were encouraged to come out because of Harry Potter. They built a community of allyship because of Harry Potter. And so for the creator of the series to basically say, cool, thank you for all of the money, but you shouldn't exist, becomes an incredibly huge problem that the Harry Potter community has struggled with. I think, my observation, we are better armed to go up against the Republican Party, I'm sorry, the whichever party, than we are to deal with what happens when the person who essentially was our literary mother betrays us so badly. That's the lesson of the growth process that Harry is still, teaching us, something we're still living through in our lived experience. But it does help us, I think, get closer to the promise of the better world that Harry was trying to get us to. So I will end, as we begin, with some encouraging words from movie Dumbledore. Happiness can be found even in the darkest of times, when one only remembers to turn on the light. Thank you.